7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome to Saturday Morning with Esther and Philip this New Year's Eve.
Coming up today, we'll be looking back at some of the big political interviews that we did this year with Rishi Sunak, John Bercow, Jacob Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson.
And we'll be analysing today's top stories, and we'll be asking you at home, what was your memorable moment of this year? So do get in touch via gbviews at gbnews.uk.
But first, here's the latest headlines with Bethany.
Esther and Phil, thank you. A very good morning to you. It's 1 minute past 10. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. Pope Benedict XVI has died at the age of 95. In a statement, the Vatican said he passed away just after 9:30 this morning within the Vatican City. He was the first pontiff to have stepped down from the role in 600 years in 2013 due to old age and ill health. Our reporter Cameron Walker takes a look at his life.
It's April 2005. White smoke rises from a chimney above the Vatican. A new pope, the 265th leader of the Catholic Church, has been elected. Pope Benedict XVI, aged 78, became the oldest newly elected pope since the 1700s, but also the first German head of the Catholic Church in centuries. Born Joseph Ratzinger in 1927, he lived with his Catholic family in Bavaria. Although his parents were anti-Nazi, Ratzinger was a member of the Hitler Youth. By the end of the Second World War, he was serving as a German soldier. Unwilling to fight, he deserted and was briefly held as a prisoner of war by the Americans. Ratzinger was ordained as a priest in 1951 and was awarded a doctorate in theology at the University of Munich a few years later. He taught at a number of universities before becoming the Archbishop of Munich and Riesling in 1977. He grew close to Pope John Paul II and became one of his closest advisors. Pope John Paul II died in April 2005. Joseph Ratzinger was elected head of the Catholic Church and became Pope Benedict XVI. He continues the legacy of his predecessor by speaking to other religious leaders, particularly Judaism and Islam. He aims to revitalise the Church in Europe and maintains traditional Catholic values relating to sexuality and priestly celibacy. He visited a number of countries in the early years of his papacy, including new guidelines allowing more use of the Latin Mass. He directly addressed historical sexual abuse within the Catholic Church, speaking out against it during a visit to the United Nations, but he came under media scrutiny in his alleged role in the cover-up of sexual and physical abuse cases by parish priests and in schools. The Vatican denounced the allegations as false and calumnious and said its handling of the cases showed wisdom and firmness. In 2013, Pope Benedict XVI announced his imminent resignation due to old age and ill health, making him the first pope in some 600 years to resign. More than 50,000 people crowded St. Peter's Square to watch his final public address. In this year's post-Christmas statement, Pope Francis made a surprise appeal at the end of his address to ask for prayers for former Pope Benedict, saying he was very sick. The Vatican issued a statement that he was receiving constant medical care. But soon after, the 95-year-old passed away in the Vatican, the home of the institution he'd dedicated more than 70 years of his life to. Cameron Walker, GB News.
Pope Benedict has died at the age of 95. Now, 4 members of the England team who won the Women's Euro 2022 are among those recognised in the New Year honours list, the first to be issued by King Charles. Captain Leah Williamson has been made an OBE, while her teammates Lucy Bronze, Beth Mead and Ellen White have been given MBEs. GB News' own Anne Diamond has also received an OBE for services to public health and to charity. Queen guitarist and animal welfare campaigner Brian May has received a knighthood. The Prime Minister has admitted the last 12 months have been tough and warned the UK's problems won't go away next year. In his New Year message to the country, Rishi Sunak said the government will continue to tackle the NHS backlog and illegal immigration. He also said King Charles's coronation will bring the country together. You're up to date on GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's get back to Esther and Philip.
Thanks, Bethany. To break down some of today's top stories, we're delighted to be joined by Conservative peer Lord Moyland and political commentator Suzanne Evans. Welcome to you both.
Hi.
Suzanne, what's caught your eye in the papers today?
So I've been looking at this headline in the Daily Mail. Festive strikes cost hospitality industry £2 billion in lost sales. This is shocking. So the poor hospitality industry has had 2 years of COVID lockdowns, restrictions, unable to operate, unable to open, unable to do their jobs. And now, on top of all this, we've had basically 4 weeks of shutdown because of strikes, mostly by the rail services, but the postal services as well, and so on and so forth. And what Michael Kill, who's the CEO of the Nighttime Industries Association, is saying, that people are too worried about book-to-book events, or they've been cancelling their work Christmas parties or family gatherings because they can't rely on people getting there. And my heart just bleeds for these people who work jolly hard. You know, working in hospitality, it's a tough job. You're on your feet all day, you're working hard, you're running around, you're giving great customer service. I was talking to a restaurant the other day in Cheshire. They had 30 cancellations. And this is what really gets me, and this is not the fault of the strikers. Those people didn't even bother to phone the restaurant.
Do you know, I was about to say that.
That is just atrocious.
That sort of started during lockdown. People staying in, maybe booking, then maybe thinking, I don't fancy going out, and people weren't calling and cancelling. And you're quite right. All of the stock that they've got in the fridge because they thought people were coming. It really has been a difficult time for them and going to continue to be so.
I mean, I've got businesses in my constituency in the hospitality industry who've been contacting me saying, look, I just can't carry on. I can't afford to carry on. The thing is that worries me. I don't know what the government can or should do. But it seems to me we're in the worst of all worlds, where, in effect, the government has spent fortunes during COVID propping up businesses, keeping them afloat, keeping them going, and they're going to close anyway now because of what's happening now. So literally all of that money is going to have been for nothing.
Exactly.
Unless they can find a way to give some
it's going to go tougher as well, isn't it? Because they're going to halve the support for businesses for their energy bills. So that's something that companies will be thinking come March, April, May, they might not have
do you think
the
the government should... Is there anything the government should... I mean, governments don't normally sort of subsidise businesses in recessions to keep them afloat. Do you think there's a special case in this?
Personally, I would argue that the government's whole response to the pandemic was wrong. They shouldn't have been subsidising and chucking out billions. They should have kept things open and protected the vulnerable. But, you know, that's spilt milk, isn't it? No good crying over it. We are where we are. I don't think the government can give in to striking workers. I mean, I'm sorry, 19% pay rise for nurses. just not feasible. The money just isn't there. The NHS has already had a 40% uplift in funding since 2010 when you allow for inflation. You know, there is a limited pot. And what I think for me is the key here is it's the strikers need to get back to work. What this is about, I think now, it's like a general strike by stealth. I think it's an attempt to bring down the government. It's gone beyond a reasonable demand for pay. And inflation is going to drop. I think we're probably going to be going into recession next year. These high inflationary pay rises are going to become looking very silly, I think, by the middle of next year, which starts tomorrow. It's not far away.
Daniel, what have you seen in the papers?
Well, I think today we have to be struck by this story that the government's going to be introducing COVID tests for people arriving from China. And it's a very interesting story that needs a little bit of unpicking, I think, because it doesn't actually say what happens if you're going to fail the test before you get on the plane. It says that about a fifth of them who do arrive here are going to be tested again to look for genomic variations in the strain. It doesn't say what will actually happen if they land here and they have got COVID. Presumably they'll still be let through, they'll just be tested. So it sounds like a really tough response. I'd like to see more detail about what it actually means. My personal view is I'm totally against lockdowns now. I'm like completely no interest in having those back. But equally, what we owe China over this is absolutely zilch. You know, they have lied from the outset about the origin of the virus, about the spread of the virus in China, about the particulars of the strains and so on. We can't trust a word they say, and I just think for our own protection and to ensure we never need a lockdown again, the government would be totally justified in saying, nobody from China can actually come here.
But what does it achieve?
At least for now.
What does it achieve? I mean,
what does what achieve?
By either insisting on a negative COVID test or not letting anybody in from China. What does it actually achieve? I mean, if people come in with COVID, they could be coming in anywhere around the world with COVID. If they're going to another, they could come in via another country.
Yeah, but
it's not actually. It doesn't actually stop it from getting here.
We hear stories about up to 1 million cases of COVID a day in China. We just don't know what they are because we can't trust what the Chinese government is saying anymore. They need to establish their credibility, I think, before we let their nationals in.
The only reason
but I think there's another question, Philip, which is what does this action achieve? What would my policy achieve if I was running the country? That's a good question. But what does this action achieve? I think that needs more digging into because I'm not actually sure at all. When it says here that Rishi Sunak demands COVID tests for arrivals from China, what is he trying to achieve? So far beyond.
Well, I think you're right there to unpick it, because all of the advisors have said you shouldn't be asking for these negative COVID tests because they don't do anything. So in a way, it's been a political decision. OK, last year, the year before, let's follow the science, let's do absolutely everything the advisors say. Now they're not, and it's more of a political decision. And also, I'd say, frightened to be left behind. You saw America doing it, you've seen Italy doing it, therefore we must do it. But you're quite right, if you don't dig in, what do they say? You stay on the plane and you get sent back if it's not negative? Or, as you say, what are they going to do? But I just thought it was interesting that they're not following the science. But then listening to our viewers yesterday, they were quite a hard line, as you're saying there, more on the line, you can't trust China. So it's not about the COVID per se, it's about your trust of China and wanting the negative test.
Do you think, Daniel, that if those other countries hadn't done it, we would have done? I mean, the thing about 2020, it struck me, is that we sort of threw our COVID response just out the door because other countries were doing lockdowns, and so we thought, oh, if they're doing it, we ought to do it. It seems to me we're going back into 2020 territory here, where we know really it's pointless. There's no point in doing it. Oh, because every other country's doing it, perhaps we should be doing it. This sort of herd instinct. That's what worries me, that we're not looking at the evidence, we're just following the herd.
That isn't what's happening, though.
But it is. That's exactly what's happened.
It is nearly
it's exactly what's happened.
Italy stands out almost alone in the European Union imposing these restrictions, and there are other countries in the European Union, like Austria, that made it absolutely clear they're not going to do so. So this is very, very different.
We followed America, it
Very
seems.
different from 2020, when you had the World Health Organization in alliance with China, which we knew nothing about at the time, we the public knew nothing about at the time, pushing very hard for the same response globally, which nearly every country, practically every country, followed. This is very different. This is much more open. It's being debated. There's much more disagreement. So I don't think we're following every other country. we may be leading every other country.
Well, I think we're up to, I think we were 7th. We joined into 7th. But look, with COVID back in the headlines this week, as England now introduces new restrictions on visitors from China, requiring to take a negative PCR test or have a negative PCR test before departure.
It seems fitting that we revisit one of our biggest interviews of the year.
And that was speaking to Rishi Sunak before he became Prime Minister, when we asked him if he would rule out any blanket lockdowns if he got the top job.
Let's remind ourselves of what he said.
Going on to your policies and lockdown and the impact that has had on the country's finances, on the economy as a whole, your reflections on that now?
Well, look, I want to be careful, Esther, because I was part of a government and I take that seriously, and you've served in government, you know what it's like. And look, when you're in the team, it doesn't mean you agree with every decision, but if you're part of the team, you sign up to that and you stay in government and you defend the decision. So I don't want to sit here and criticise things that the government did, because that's not the right thing to do. That's not the Conservative thing to do. But look, I think it's no great secret that, throughout that process, I was keen to try and make sure that all parts of the impact of lockdowns were considered, because, yes, there was an argument that they could help slow the spread of COVID, but it's very clear, and we learnt more over time, that they were also having a significant impact on lots of other things, people's mental health, other health outcomes when people were not getting other treatment, obviously the economy and people's jobs, which long-term impacts their health as well, and notably on our kids and their education. And I was constantly trying to make sure that all those things were taken into account as well. And look, right at the end, I was away on a government trip abroad last Christmas. I flew back home deliberately to make sure that I could make the argument strongly that this country did not go into another lockdown because of Omicron. And we really were sleepwalking in that direction at that moment. We were hours away from a press conference that was about to announce it. And I led the charge with a couple of others and saying, no, this would be a mistake for our country. The data didn't support it. We could just wait to see what was happening in South Africa. And I'm really glad I did. It wasn't an easy thing to do because the entire kind of establishment was saying we got to lock down. But I'm glad I stood up to them. I'm glad I made the argument that was the wrong thing to do, and I'm glad that was ultimately vindicated.
So if you became Prime Minister, can you say you wouldn't blanket lockdown again for another COVID-type pandemic?
I think it would be wrong for anyone to sit here, Esther, and say that they can never rule out in all circumstances. But I think people have seen my record over the last couple of years and what I did in December with Omicron. For me, the bar is very high, because I think there's lots of things that you need to take into account in those decisions.
Okay, I'm going to repeat this question again. A blanket lockdown for a COVID-type pandemic. Can you say yes or no, you would or wouldn't lock down again?
Well, I think a blanket lockdown, in the way we did it before, clearly was far too blunt an instrument, as we discovered. And we learned as we went along that there wasn't the need for that type of blanket lockdown. And that's why, over time, we could find different ways to deal with this. And actually, for COVID, now we have vaccines and new antiviral treatments. It would seem to me highly unlikely that you would ever need to do a lockdown for a COVID-type pandemic, because we already now have the protections, which mean that it wouldn't be necessary to stop something very bad happening, because we've got a bunch of protections now against COVID. So it seems to me highly, highly unlikely that you would ever need to do something like that.
So that was us interviewing Rishi Sunak there during the summer when the leadership election was going on. What did you think to what he said there?
Well, I remember watching this interview and really being so grateful to you, Esther, that you pushed him and pushed him. But he didn't answer the question. He never answered your question, and he didn't rule out lockdowns. And he also clearly in that interview said he still thought that lockdowns stopped the spread of COVID. Look at what's happening in China. We've just been talking about it. China has had the harshest, most brutal, ruthless lockdowns, with people literally sealed in their homes. Everybody's wearing masks. It hasn't worked. All it's done is delay it. It's a bit like, and perhaps this is a very crass analogy, but it's a bit like taking HRT. It doesn't stop you getting the menopause. It just means you only get the menopause when you come off the pills. And I think this is all that lockdown does. It might very well put a lid on it for a while, but once you can't keep people locked down forever. And look at what's happening in China. As Daniel said, potentially 1 million new cases every day. It doesn't work. And come on, Rishi, please come out and say no more lockdowns, certainly not for something that we now know is much more mild than it was at the beginning as COVID.
Now, I know that Rishi was... he's not saying this after time, because at the time of the first lockdown, I spoke to Rishi just by coincidence, and he said to me at the time he was very sceptical about whether or not we should be doing something this harsh. So I know that right from the word go, he was very concerned about it. You said, Daniel, earlier that you were against lockdowns. Were you reassured by what Rishi said there, that he wouldn't ever introduce a blanket lockdown again?
Yeah, well, I was reassured. I think the truth is that we all know we can't afford one. And he knows it slightly better than most people, because counting money and keeping the accounts was part of his job at the time. I mean, it's an interesting question if his role and Matt Hancock's role had been reversed, and he'd been Health Secretary and Matt Hancock had been Chancellor, which way around they'd be arguing, because actually, of course, what happens is in cabinet government is that people get into a room round a table and they argue a different point of view, depending to some extent on what their portfolio is. But Rishi was on the right side about this, partly because he was focused on the huge cost. And we're now paying the cost. I mean, this inflation we've got arises from the money, not that we spent during lockdown, that'd be bad enough, but the money we just printed and created out of nothing.
Well, funny enough, front page of the FT there, and it shows it was a globe, globally, we locked everywhere down. Markets lose more than 30 trillion in the worst year since the financial crash. That's what lockdowns did to the world.
Yeah, so we've got this inflation now, which feeds directly through into the strikes. And I slightly disagree with Suzanne. I'm more sympathetic. I mean, I'm not sympathetic to the strikes, but I entirely understand why people want wage increases that compensate them for inflation. They didn't cause the inflation.
I think
they
it was
don't cause
19%. People are far more sympathetic with getting more, but not sort of double.
But I entirely understand why people want at least the rate of inflation. 19% is another question.
Yes.
But at least the rate of inflation, why they're willing to strike for it.
I'm now going to have to end there. We've got so much to get in. We've got such wonderful people in the studio. But look, stay with us, because still to come, we'll be speaking to historian David Starkey on a dramatic year for the royal family. And our guests will be back too. We've got other great interviews from Boris Johnson, and we'll be back in a moment.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory.
twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back. It's 10:25. Now, this year has certainly been a year full of highs and lows for the royal family.
In June, we celebrated the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. Mere 3 months later, we joined together to mourn Her late Majesty.
Not to mention family reunions, legal troubles, fractured relationships, exiled royals. It's been a tough 12-month for the House of Windsor.
Joining us now to discuss the Royal Year in Review is historian David Starkey. David, thank you very much for joining us. I just wondered, given that it's New Year's Eve, I just wondered what you thought the state of the monarchy was today compared to 12 months ago.
Well, we know, in a sense, much more about the future, don't we? 12 months ago, we were visibly, although we were regretting the fact, we were at the end of the longest reign in English history. We're now at the beginning of a new reign. And moreover, in general, one doesn't want, I think King Charles has a certain sense of smugness about him, and one doesn't want to exacerbate it to make it worse. But I think he's begun pretty well. His accession speech, which, remember, is complete innovation, nothing like that before, when he says, frankly, I know I'm no longer Prince of Wales. I know I can't espouse all my causes in the way that I used to. I know I've got to be a constitutional parliamentary monarch. And then when he repeats all that in front of the joint session of the Houses of Parliament in Westminster Hall, he's actually able to make a joke. He's sitting roughly where his predecessor and namesake was tried for his life and later executed outside his palace. So I think in that sense, the king has really begun very, very well. There are other aspects which are less good.
I don't think anybody was surprised about the outpouring of grief about Her late Majesty the Queen. But were you slightly surprised about how popular King Charles was so soon? Because I think before he became king, there was certainly some view that people might not take to him quite as well as they had his mother.
That's certainly the case. And that view was actually pushed very hard. And remember, the person pushing that view principally, one has to say it, was the late Princess Diana, who did everything she could, it must be said, to damage Charles's prospects as king. And he survived, not least, of course, because of the Queen herself. The late Queen, Elizabeth II, she's the one who says firmly, I want my son to succeed as head of the Commonwealth. She's the one in one of her last interventions in public life who says, I want Camilla to be queen. So she does what a monarch should do, which is, remember, the whole purpose of monarchy is continuity. She smooths the path to the next generation. It's like a kind of relay race of generations. You don't pass on a baton, and you're not wearing shorts, you're wearing a crown and robes, but you pass that on. And that extraordinary moment of the Queen's death, her funeral, which we all remember, when the crown was removed from the coffin, that extraordinary moment again, when the wand of office was broken. You had the sense of sovereignty, monarchy moving from one person to another. And I think Charles has grasped the baton very impressively. Now, that doesn't mean that there are not problems. I mean, Harry and Meghan, well,
I was going to ask about that, David. How is King Charles now going to stamp his authority moving forward? How is he going to battle with other people, it seems like, who are vying for a new royal family from across the waters, Harry and Meghan?
I don't think they much matter. I mean, look at the opinion polls today. I mean, a near majority of people not only say they don't much like them, but they actually want them stripped of their titles. I mean, with every passing day, I think with every desperate attempt at taking a little molehill of grievance and trying to turn it into a vast Himalayas of resentment, they become less relevant. And what I think Charles is doing is actually playing a rather clever long game. What I would guess, Esther, he's waiting for them to destroy themselves. So he doesn't actually need to do anything very dramatic. He's just letting events take their course, which I think is a very wise thing to do. I mean, where I think the monarchy went rather badly wrong was what I think has been the only really serious blemish since his accession, which was the handling of the extraordinary affair of Lady Susan Hussey in that bizarre confrontation with this strange lady who was dressed up as a kind of, African queen from a traveling circus. And the way in which the royal family appeared, and we now know it's essentially just the household of the Prince of Wales, to come down so firmly against her, a woman who is, after all, the Prince of Wales' godmother, the longest-serving lady in waiting to Queen, the woman who actually, for heaven's sake, accompanied her to her husband's funeral. To dump her like that was disgraceful. And it also, I think it shows a tone deafness with monarchy. Monarchy is going to have to do two things. It's going to have to balance an old world and a new world.
David, just quickly, obviously we've just heard the news about Pope Benedict passing away. I just wondered of your reflections on Pope Benedict.
Well, there we're seeing a very different thing. We're seeing an organisation which is publicly and totally split. And the papacy of Benedict was a papacy absolutely opposed to the current papacy of Pope Francis. It's an organisation which clearly is fighting its battles almost in public. Again, the papacy is another kind of monarchy. It's an elective monarchy, but it's handling the processes of balancing old and new and transition from one monarch to another much less well than dear old Britain.
Dr. David Starkey, thank you so much indeed for taking the time to join us this morning. We really appreciate it. Suzanne, what do you think about the state of the royal family at the end of this year compared to 12 months ago?
I think it's almost too soon to tell. The Queen's death was obviously a major fraction in the whole issue, but I hope Harry and Meghan are reflecting. I suspect they're not, but I would like to think that they gave this woman so much grief before she died. I think it was absolutely dreadful. I have, in the interest of work, you understand, sat through and watched all 6 episodes of their Netflix series. Gosh. And have been alternately kind of provoked to think, but also horrified at the way in which they seem to think Britain is this most terrible, racist, nasty country. I find it absolutely astonishing. However, on the other hand, I think they do have some point to make about the way in which they are totally hounded by the press.
Daniel, the point that David Starkey raised there about just ignoring them and letting the public decide and sort of leaving them out to dry. We see in the polls today, actually the public would like the Sussexes to have their titles removed. Is he playing then a canny long game, the King?
Well, I think the truth is that the King doesn't have a lot of options open to him anyway. I mean, you ask the question, how does he stamp his authority on Harry and Meghan? Well, he can't. And so I think he's quite right to say, to ignore them, if you like. It's sad to have to say this about someone in relation to his own son, but to say you have to give them the opportunity to develop for themselves, and if that results in them destroying themselves, at least their credibility with the British public, then that'll be fine. But what other option does he have anyway?
Daniel, Suzanne, do stay with us. Send us your views in as well. What do you think? GBnews at gbnews.uk. Now, coming up after the break, we revisit one of our big political interviews of the year with Jacob Rees-Mogg. So don't go anywhere. But first, it's the news with Bethany.
Esther and Phil, thank you. It's 10:33. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom. Pope Benedict XVI has died at the age of 95. In a statement, the Vatican said he passed away just after 9:30 this morning within the Vatican City. In 2013, he became the first pontiff to step down from the role in 600 years due to old age and ill health. Our reporter Cameron Walker takes a look at his life.
It's April 2005. White smoke rises from a chimney above the Vatican. A new pope, the 265th leader of the Catholic Church, has been elected. Pope Benedict XVI, aged 78, became the oldest newly elected pope since the 1700s, but also the first German head of the Catholic Church in centuries. Born Joseph Ratzinger in 1927, he lived with his Catholic family in Bavaria. Although his parents were anti-Nazi, Ratzinger was a member of the Hitler Youth. By the end of the Second World War, he was serving as a German soldier. Unwilling to fight, he deserted and was briefly held as a prisoner of war by the Americans. Ratzinger was ordained as a priest in 1951 and was awarded a doctorate in theology at the University of Munich a few years later. He taught at a number of universities before becoming the Archbishop of Munich and Riesling in 1977. He grew close to Pope John Paul II and became one of his closest advisors. Pope John Paul II died in April 2005. Joseph Ratzinger was elected head of the Catholic Church and became Pope Benedict XVI. He continues the legacy of his predecessor by speaking to other religious leaders, particularly Judaism and Islam. He aims to revitalise the Church in Europe and maintains traditional Catholic values relating to sexuality and priestly celibacy. He visited a number of countries in the early years of his papacy, including new guidelines allowing more use of the Latin Mass. He directly addressed historical sexual abuse within the Catholic Church, speaking out against it during a visit to the United Nations, but he came under media scrutiny in his alleged role in the cover-up of sexual and physical abuse cases by parish priests and in schools. The Vatican denounced the allegations as false and calumnious and said its handling of the cases showed wisdom and firmness. In 2013, Pope Benedict XVI announced his imminent resignation due to old age and ill health, making him the first pope in some 600 years to resign. More than 50,000 people crowded St. Peter's Square to watch his final public address. In this year's post-Christmas statement, Pope Francis made a surprise appeal at the end of his address to ask for prayers for former Pope Benedict, saying he was very sick. The Vatican issued a statement that he was receiving constant medical care. But soon after, the 95-year-old passed away in the Vatican, the home of the institution he'd dedicated more than 70 years of his life to. Cameron Walker, GB News.
Pope Benedict XVI, who's died at the age of 95. We're on TV, online and DAB Plus radio. This is GB News. We'll have more news for you in half an hour. Esther and Philip will be back in just a moment.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere. Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, it's 10:40. Well, Tory turmoil was certainly the political theme of 2022. And this summer, as the first leadership contest of the year raged, we sat down with Jacob Rees-Mogg for his thoughts on how Westminster upheaval would impact the Conservative Party.
We asked him why he remained such a big supporter of the former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, and why he thought Liz Truss was the right person to follow in his footsteps.
When did you first decide that you wanted Boris to be Prime Minister?
I thought he was by far and away the best candidate in 2016, and I was going to support him then, had his campaign continued, and I would have carried on supporting him. I'd switched to Michael Gove once Boris had decided not to go for it. And then we saw the difficulties that Theresa May got into, and it became absolutely clear to me that there was only one candidate who could possibly deliver for us and have the charisma and reach that Boris Johnson has, that successfully won the 2019 election, dealt with Brexit and so on. As long as there was a contest and he was a runner, he was somebody I was going to back.
How would you score his government and his time as Prime Minister out of 10?
I think his government has been extremely successful, even in the areas where I have been slightly more cautious. So if you take Brexit, Brexit was delivered. And from the starting point he had with the deal that was on the table beforehand, that was really a brilliant success. During the pandemic, it may not surprise you to know, indeed we may even have discussed it at the time, I was very much in favour of a more liberal approach in allowing people to make decisions for themselves. Nonetheless, I think the PM got all the big choices right and did what he almost had to do. There was much less discretion over it than I think you or I would have liked, because if you're being told by all the senior advisors who are meant to know about this sort of thing that you will kill people if you don't have a lockdown, you're taking a huge risk in not having a lockdown. And obviously he got the decision over the vaccine right. But also interestingly, though this cost a lot of money, over getting the PPE supplies. You remember the panic there was to get these supplies, and actually the UK managed to deliver them. A lot of them produced domestically. I think we went from under 1% being produced domestically to 80% being produced domestically, excluding gloves, as it happens. And so he got the big decisions right. And then at Christmas, he was the one who decided that we would not close down again. And that was proved to be the right decision, because Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland did close down. with no better result than we had in England. And all the advice was telling him not to from the experts. But he made the bold decision. He thought the British people could be trusted to make decisions for themselves. And that had a huge benefit economically and societally. So he got that right, and he got Ukraine right, which I think is one of the biggest foreign policy decisions of our lifetimes, possibly the biggest foreign policy decision since the Falklands. So really important things he's got right. The area where I think the government has not been so strong is on economic policy. But there's somebody else that I would blame for that.
So if I was to be critical of the Boris Johnson government and his record, I would say we had the lockdowns, which, you know, a socialist would have been proud of the restrictions on people's
They all
freedoms.
voted for it. They were that proud of it.
Absolutely. That we had the, as you've just alluded to, the highest burden of taxation probably on record, and he's the First Lord of the Treasury. We've had the banning of buy one, get one free offers that he brought forward, and all this sort of nanny state kind of stuff. We left the EU, as you said, but we still had the Northern Ireland Protocol, which is carved up the United Kingdom. So people might look at that and say, well, actually, that doesn't sound like a particularly strong record to me.
Well, I think if we talk about the Northern Ireland Protocol, we got Brexit done, and we're now dealing with the Northern Ireland Protocol. And that actually the one person who has been pushing that most strongly is Liz Truss, who, as everyone remembers, voted Remain and has shown herself to be somebody who can put Brexit into practice. I share your concern on the tax burden. I thought the national insurance increase was a mistake. I argued strongly against it. Actually, there was quite an amusing circumstance. After the cabinet that approved it, I went on to another meeting with the chief whip and suddenly realised I'd left my telephone outside the cabinet room, went back to get it, and then came out of Downing Street half an hour after everybody else, and I got a message from Sky News saying, was I being persuaded out of resigning? No, not at all. I just had left my telephone in the wrong place.
That's how front page stories start. It's exactly how front page stories start their speculation.
Yes.
So, Daniel, do you think, like Jacob did there, that Boris got the big decisions right?
Well, let me just say, first of all, I worked for Boris for 8 years when he was Mayor of London. And I think the central story, if you like, politically, of the year, around which everything else spins, is Boris's forced resignation. So whether you think he was right or wrong, that's the pivot on which everything has actually turned politically in the course of this year. Broadly speaking, yes, Boris did get...
Dig into that a little bit more. What do you mean?
Well,
why?
What I mean by that...
Not the build-up to why he had to go and the things that had gone wrong?
No, it's the whole process of removing him and then what happened after he was removed and the fact that his successor wasn't acceptable to the people who'd removed him and the fact that we've ended up with the person who lost the election to replace him as Prime Minister. All of that is really one long... It looks like it was... Looking back, you could say this is a load of just random things happening, but it wasn't really. There was a story there, and if Boris had succeeded in continuing as Prime Minister in the middle of the year, so he'd still be Prime Minister today, I think the Conservative Party would be in a very much better place, and I think that there are things that we'd be doing now and capable of doing which would be helping to secure a Conservative victory at the next general election, which Rishi has the opportunity to show us he can do that, but we're waiting to see it.
Suzanne, a lot of people will say, actually, the opposition were delighted when Boris went because they realised he was an election sort of, whether it's genius or a great campaigner or people loved him. And do you think they thought, great, and this term also? So,
and they've been proved absolutely right. You only have to look in the way in which the opinion polls have dropped off a cliff for the Conservative Party by about 20% since Boris Johnson was deposed. And it was deposed. I mean, who can forget all the MPs lining up to get their pens out fast enough to say, let's get rid of Boris Johnson. But that said, I have to admit, I was one of the people that was quite pleased when he went because I think he'd been a disaster as Prime Minister. adored Boris, like a lot of the population. I thought he was great. I think had he become Prime Minister in 2016, as Jacob Rees-Mogg alluded to in that interview, I think he would have been by far the best candidate. But of course, there was that argument with Michael Gove. He withdrew. We all remember the look of shock and horror on Nadine Dorries' face. So we had Theresa May. Boris had led the Brexit campaign. He had been a big vocal supporter of Brexit. Had he then had the chance to get stuck in and do the job, it would have been a lot easier for him, I think.
How many people say that in the House of Parliament? Philip, lots of them said, you know, probably the Prime Ministers came in the wrong order. It should have gone Boris and then Theresa May. Interesting, that.
Were you surprised, Daniel, about people like Jacob supporting Liz Truss in the leadership election? I mean, we did put it to him that, you know, Liz Truss, she was against the monarchy, she was a former Lib Dem, she campaigned for Remain in the referendum. He seemed an unlikely person for people like Jacob Rees-Mogg to support in a leadership contest.
Well, I actually voted for Liz Truss and did so on television, sitting at this desk on an edition of Dubes & Co. And I brought my ballot paper in, everyone could see I voted for Liz Truss.
Was it a mistake?
No. I think it was right, and Liz Truss was never properly given a chance, and principally by Conservative MPs, who didn't like the result that the members and the rules had foisted on them, so said, we'll give it a go without the members.
Thank you. Well, good debating. We could go on for hours about that, I think. Anyway, sticking with politics, one of the biggest problems the UK government faces in the new year is how to deal with mass migration into the country and stopping the dinghies from France.
Earlier this month, we spoke to Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick, who detailed the changes needed to fix our immigration system.
We will need more legislation to sharpen up our laws here, because the system isn't just broken, it's in danger of becoming obsolete. Our whole immigration system was created after the Second World War in an entirely different era, looking at the Holocaust and the horrors that happened in Europe. Treaties like the ECHR, the Refugee Convention were signed. Today is a totally different world where an Albanian could get a Wizz Air flight from Tirana to Brussels, get a bus to Calais, and then pay a few £1,000s to get across the Channel.
What's the likelihood that it's going to be emergency legislation, something that David Davis is calling through to get this through quickly?
Well, we are working through what we think is the best route here. I can't tell you today on the show, but all I can say is that every day, Suella Braverman and myself are working through what that legislation might look like. We're constantly speaking to the Prime Minister. We think that this is a problem that could be with us for many years to come. Mass migration is going to be one of the stories of the 21st century. And so we have to recreate our immigration system so that it's fit for purpose. That will mean creating a system where deterrence is suffused through the whole thing. And to me, that means that you should not get a route to life in the UK if you come here illegally. There will be policies like Rwanda at the heart of it, and I hope that we can enact that as soon as it gets through the British courts. It will also mean looking at how we treat people on arrival so that nobody thinks that coming to the UK is a soft touch, and the UK is not a better site for asylum shoppers than our EU neighbours.
Our viewers won't want to hear that this is going to be a problem that's with us for years to come. They're hoping the government's going to solve it.
Well, my point is, Phil, is that mass migration is going to be one of the stories of the 21st century. There's going to be hundreds of millions of people on the move all around the world. And so we have to prepare our immigration system so that we can tackle that. It's not a question of just, this might be a fleeting challenge. That's why I think very serious reform of the system is necessary. And that's the kind of legislation that Suella and I are looking at.
Very forthright interview there, wasn't it? I thought he was very straight talking. Now, page 7 of the Times for the Prime Minister won't make great reading. He's got trouble ahead, 8 issues that could topple him, and it goes everything from inflation, industrial action, but migration is up there, and threat rating is 5 out of 5. How are the Tories going to deal with it?
Well, the truth is, I don't know. I'm a great supporter. I'm a Conservative. I'm a great supporter of the Conservative Party. But since I've sat in the House of Lords, and where we do a lot of detailed scrutiny of legislation over the last couple of years I've been in the House of Lords, what I've discovered is you get letters and speeches from the government, a little bit like Robert Jenrick, including great phrases like, we're going to sharpen the pencil, we're going to cut the edge, we're going to make it fit for purpose, and so on. And none of it's worth a damn until you see what the legislation actually says. So I'm willing to sit back, and I trust him, and I trust Suella Braverman. They're going to come up with a package of legislation which is going to be effective and actually work. And when I see that, I'll feel capable of saying that the government will no longer be exposed to this threat.
So, Suzanne, I mean, this is, I suppose, Rishi Sunak's inherited this problem. He hasn't caused it, he's inherited it. Some people might say this is another failing of Boris Johnson's government, not tackling the dinghies and legal immigration being 500,000 in his final year as Prime Minister.
Yeah, I mean, in just about every election I can remember in the last sort of 30 years, the Conservative Party has promised to cut legal migration and to cut illegal migration, and they haven't done it. And they've had arguably 12 years, even 8 if you consider the Lib Dem coalition, to sort this problem, and they haven't done it. They've got 18 months. If they don't sort it, they're toast.
Oh, Suzanne, Daniel, stay with us. Now, the New Year Honours List has been released, highlighting the incredible public service of individuals from across the UK.
More than 1,000 people have been recognised for their contributions to society in the first list of King Charles's reign, including, of course, our very own Anne Diamond, which we're delighted about.
Yeah. Joining us now is Luanna Hood, a nanny and maternity nurse. So, Luanna, you've received a BEM. Would you like to tell us why you got this and how pleased you are to get it?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm absolutely delighted. So shocked, but it's, a huge honour. And back in at the beginning of March, when the war broke out in Ukraine, my friend who was Polish showed me photographs of women and children walking into her city with literally nothing, carrying all that they could carry. And being a nanny myself, I know how much stuff you need when you just go on a day trip with a baby. So I couldn't imagine being, told you have to leave your home with literally what you can carry in your own 2 hands. So I said, well, we can help with some initial relief, just, baby food, nappies, wipes, that kind of thing, if I have an address that I can get it to. And so I put it out to my Instagram followers and just said, guys, I know where we can help, and I'm very happy to pay for a couple of big boxes to go out there within the next few days. And that was on a Sunday, and on Monday, by the end of the day, my whole house was full of donations. I have a really good friend who owns a haulage company called Philip Judge, and I rang him, and to begin with, I said, do you think we could get a van out to Poland in the next week? And he said, yeah, sure. So by the end of the day, it went from a van to a container. And 2 days later, I had 2 marquees on my driveway, and we ended up sending 6 container loads of, just baby essentials, really, out to Poland. And we also raised a lot of money as well. So,
Luanna, did you know it was going to be this big from an Instagram post to what you've achieved?
Absolutely not. Yeah, no, I mean, I've never done anything like this before, other than sort of fundraising maybe at my primary school. It definitely snowballed, and we just went with it and kept going.
Well, GBNews and all of our viewers want to thank you what you've done and wish you all the best, and congratulations on your honour. Definitely deserve that.
No, because I think it gets a bad press, doesn't it, the honours list sometimes and all the rest of it. But people like Luanna, that's exactly, they're the worthy recipients of the honours list.
Anyway, that's it for the first hour. Coming up, we'll be going through some of our biggest interviews of the year with Boris Johnson and John Bercow. We've got lots still to come, and obviously our guests, Suzanne and Daniel, will be staying with us. So make yourself a cup of tea, but don't go anywhere. See you soon.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Some more of our biggest interviews of the year, this time with Boris Johnson and John Bercow.
And we'll also be analysing today's top stories and looking at all things showbiz and sport. But first, here's the news with Bethany.
Esther and Philip, thank you very much. A very good morning to you. It's 1 minute past 11. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom. Pope Benedict XVI has died at the age of 95. In a statement, the Vatican said he passed away just after 9:30 this morning within the Vatican City. He was the first pontiff to have stepped down from the role in 600 years in 2013 due to old age and ill health. Our reporter, Cameron Walker, takes a look at his life.
It's April 2005. White smoke rises from a chimney above the Vatican. A new pope, the 265th leader of the Catholic Church, has been elected. Pope Benedict XVI, aged 78, became the oldest newly elected pope since the 1700s, but also the first German head of the Catholic Church in centuries. Born Joseph Ratzinger in 1927, he lived with his Catholic family in Bavaria. Although his parents were anti-Nazi, Ratzinger was a member of the Hitler Youth. By the end of the Second World War, he was serving as a German soldier. Unwilling to fight, he deserted and was briefly held as a prisoner of war by the Americans. Ratzinger was ordained as a priest in 1951 and was awarded a doctorate in theology at the University of Munich a few years later. He taught at a number of universities before becoming the Archbishop of Munich and Riesling in 1977. He grew close to Pope John Paul II and became one of his closest advisors. Pope John Paul II died in April 2005. Joseph Ratzinger was elected head of the Catholic Church and became Pope Benedict XVI. He continues the legacy of his predecessor by speaking to other religious leaders, particularly Judaism and Islam.
Dominus Iesu Christi confidimus.
He aims to revitalise the Church in Europe and maintains traditional Catholic values relating to sexuality and priestly celibacy. He visited a number of countries in the early years of his papacy, including new guidelines allowing more use of the Latin Mass. He directly addressed historical sexual abuse within the Catholic Church, speaking out against it during a visit to the United Nations, but he came under media scrutiny in his alleged role in the cover-up of sexual and physical abuse cases by parish priests and in schools. The Vatican denounced the allegations as false and calumnious and said its handling of the cases showed wisdom and firmness. In 2013, Pope Benedict XVI announced his imminent resignation due to old age and ill health, making him the first pope in some 600 years to resign. More than 50,000 people crowded St. Peter's Square to watch his final public address. In this year's post-Christmas statement, Pope Francis made a surprise appeal at the end of his address to ask for prayers for former Pope Benedict, saying he was very sick. The Vatican issued a statement that he was receiving constant medical care. But soon after, the 95-year-old passed away in the Vatican, the home of the institution he'd dedicated more than 70 years of his life to. Cameron Walker, GB News.
Pope Benedict XVI has died at the age of 95. Now we can go live to the scenes at Vatican City, where worshippers are already gathering. The Vatican has announced that from Monday morning, people will be able to pay their respects as he rests in St. Peter's Basilica. Tributes from religious leaders have begun pouring in. The head of the Roman Catholic Church in England and Wales and the Archbishop of Canterbury have both described the former Pope as one of the great theologians of the 20th century. The Prime Minister has admitted the last 12 months have been tough and warned the UK's problems won't go away next year. In his New Year message to the country, Rishi Sunak said the government will continue to tackle the NHS backlog and illegal immigration. He also said King Charles's coronation will bring the country together. And celebrations to see in the new year have begun around the world. These are the scenes in New Zealand, welcoming in 2023 with fireworks. It's a display over the Auckland Sky Tower. Earlier, there was a light show over Auckland Harbour Bridge. We'll bring you those scenes across the world as we get them. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's get back to Esther and Philip.
Thanks, Bethany. Your views have been coming in thick and fast from the first hour, particularly about the interview with David Starkey.
Yeah, Dan says David Starkey is totally correct about how disgracefully Lady Hussey was treated. Harry and Meghan will destroy themselves and be obsolete before the end of 2023. The sooner the better. Obviously, that's what he's hoping for this new year.
Lava says, why do you assume that all the British public hate Meghan and Harry? I don't. I also think their titles should be removed either. I get so sick of only the very small-minded viewpoint.
Oh, Mary says Meghan seems spoiled. She has a right to say something. She automatically will say it regardless of consequences. But it doesn't work out, it's somebody else's fault. Mary says, grow up, Meghan.
Keep those views coming in. We're still joined in the studio by Conservative peer Lord Moyland and political commentator Suzanne Evans.
So we want to know what your abiding political memory is of 2022. Should we go to you first, Suzanne?
So it was the 23rd of September when Kwasi Kwarteng stood at the dispatch box in the House of Commons and did his budget plan. The mini-budget, it became known as the growth plan, the official title. And I can tell you at one point I was in tears. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I was, because I thought, finally, thank you, God, we have a Conservative government. Finally, after 25 years of socialist economic policy, we have got someone who is prepared to stop making the same mistakes over and over again and expecting a different result. And we've got a plan for growth to cut the UK tax burden, and which is the highest level now since the 1940s, and actually introduce this revolutionary policy of letting people keep more of their own money. And I thought it was absolutely fantastic. It was absolutely a plan for growth. I thought if we're going to recover from the ravages of COVID lockdowns and global economic conditions, which are going to take us into recession at worst and anemic growth at best, this is going to be able to deliver the goods and this is going to change it. And then, wham, almost immediately, it was like Brexit all over again, the absolute onslaught of attacks. The Bank of England, the International Monetary Fund, the US president even got involved. And of course, Rishi Sunak's supporters in the House of Commons, who just absolutely ripped it to shreds. And there you go. Death of the Conservative Party all over again.
The problem was, Suzanne, wasn't about the tax cuts as far as I can see. I mean, I'm with you. I think the burden of tax is too high. I'd like to see taxes come down. The problem was the announcement wasn't accompanied by spending cuts. Now, if it had said, well, and in order to deliver those lower taxes, we're going to have to start controlling spending and, as Esther always says, get rid of HS2 or something like that, then perhaps you might have got away with it. But just announcing whole-scale tax cuts without any corresponding spending cuts was the mistake, wasn't it?
Absolutely right. The only thing wrong with that budget was the communication of it. And of course, people like you and me, Philip, we know the backstory. We know there's going to be spending cuts. We know that tax cuts don't have to be funded. This was the media line. How are these tax cuts going to be funded? They don't have to be funded. It's spending cuts that need to be funded.
Daniel, you said, when I said, well, was it a mistake that you voted for Liz Truss? You said no. How did you see that mini budget? Or, quickly, and then obviously your moment of the year.
Well, I didn't think the mini-budget was perfect, but I thought at least it gave us a chance of avoiding a recession and a doubling down on tax. And the history of the last 20 years or so, and the Conservatives have to take some responsibility for this, is the growth of the size of the state. And the government now spends, getting on for, nearly 50% of everything we earn. Back in the 1990s, when we were in power, that was closer to 35%. We're now above 45%. Now, what's the plan for reversing that? I once had the chance to ask Rishi Sunak that question when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer. And I know he's conscious of the problem. But where is the plan for reversing that, for getting back to the 35%?
Well, that's something you might wish for in 2023, but a memory of 2022?
Memory of 2022, without any doubt, is Boris resigning as Prime Minister. That was, as I said earlier in the show, the pivotal moment. That was like the moment when the knives went into Julius Caesar. That's the central event, and everything flows from, up to and from that fundamental act of betrayal, which is, here was the man who gave Conservative MPs a majority of whatever it was, 80 seats, and then the gratitude, the return for that is what they did.
Well, what I'll say now is earlier in 2022, we did sit down with former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, the first of 3 Tory leaders to grace number 10 this year.
We asked about his policies during the COVID pandemic, and for the first time on screen, he opened up a bit about his own life-threatening battle with the virus in early April 2020.
Prime Minister, this week, 2 years ago,
yes,
you went into hospital, you went into intensive care. So can we take you back to that moment? Because you've never really spoken about it. And how bad did things get?
Well, I've got to be absolutely clear that whatever happened to me was really mild by comparison with the experience of so many other people, so many thousands of other people in this country. And it was an absolutely appalling pandemic, and remains pretty grim. It hasn't gone away entirely. We've got loads of cases in the country at the moment still.
I know you don't always like to talk about you, and you don't like to talk about sort of personal things.
Yeah,
but you getting, diagnosed, you had COVID, and pre-going into hospital. What do you remember as you went on that journey 2 years ago to now?
Well, I do remember that it had sort of just started to come to the country in the sense that more and more people were getting it, and I think I'm right in saying that we had some parliamentary friends who'd got it. I think maybe Matt and Nadine, I think had
You're blaming them, are you?
No, I'm not blaming them at all. But yeah, I think there was a period, quite a long period, when I.
But you must have known things were sort of going wrong. You would have lost your smell, you wouldn't have been feeling well, you must have known to take in a COVID test, or did you think that was the rigours of being a Prime Minister of a country?
Well, don't forget, Esther, this was in the days when a COVID test was a pretty rare thing, and I certainly didn't want to make use of a test that wasn't necessary.
So you delayed getting the test?
No, I wouldn't say that. I just got on with my job because it was a new disease, and we didn't really know very much about it. And the smell thing, I don't remember at all. I don't remember noticing a loss of sense of smell or anything like that. I think I just sort of, I think it was Chris Whitty after a while who said, I think you probably ought to have a test. And
what had he noticed? I mean, what were the symptoms? You know, you carry, pregnant, first child, you know, what was going on sort of in your family, you know, that people have said, look, Boris, you're just not yourself.
I certainly didn't feel 100%. And then, you're absolutely right, that it was after I'd had it for quite a few days, and I went off and self-isolated. But it kind of didn't go away, and it didn't get better. And then there came the moment when, I said, it's not getting better, and they said, well, we think you ought to go into hospital and have it looked at. As I went to hospital, have it looked at, and they were fantastic. They were wonderful. I heard
there were times you couldn't get up the stairs. And you know, your wife had to help you. Things weren't.
Anybody who's had COVID, and there are many thousands of people who have been through it in the country today, will tell you that it can be pretty debilitating. It does put you flat on your back. That's what happened to me. It was in the early stages of our understanding of it. I went into hospital, and it was certainly true that my oxygen levels, for whatever reason, were pretty low. And you know, they put the oximeter on your forefinger, and they monitor you very, very carefully. And they were absolutely brilliant, but for some reason they couldn't seem to get my oxygen levels to get up to the levels that they wanted. And you should be roughly sort of 94% or above 94% oxygenation of the blood. And I think when I went in, I was in the 80s somewhere, I think. And I then had a pretty groggy night, and went down even lower. But as I've said before, the NHS was absolutely amazing, and I owe everything to two nurses in particular. The whole team was incredible, but there was a nurse called Jenny and a nurse called Louise, and one from New Zealand. Jenny was from New Zealand and Louise was from Portugal, and they were very, very good at making sure that I got the right amount of oxygen at the right time.
So did they put you on a ventilator? Did you want to go on a ventilator?
I had no views about. They didn't put me on a ventilator, but this was, I think, in the early days when we thought generally that getting people onto a ventilator was a good thing. And if you'll recall, we launched this thing called the Ventilator Challenge. And the people, the British industry, British manufacturing, responded heroically.
You clearly want to downplay how serious it was because of what other people have been through, and we understand that. But obviously for you to go to hospital, it must have been pretty serious. I mean, who said you should go to hospital? Who made that decision? You needed to go.
I think it was, Philip, I just think it was the medical advice at the time. I think the general view was, I think probably...
See, I have to tell you, Philip, this is a male thing, right? You never want to talk about how you were ill. And I get that, and as a Prime Minister, you might not want to talk about that. So if I say, did it change you as a person?
I had two wonderful doctors called Nick, both from St Thomas's, and it was their sort of view that I probably needed to come in. So it wasn't my idea. But on the, I mean, I think when you're going through something like that, you don't actually think of it in those terms. I was thinking about, all the stuff I had to do, and I mean, I spent most of the time thinking, God, I wish I could I've got to get out of here because I'm pretty certain I've got to do a press conference tomorrow morning. I'm pretty certain we've got, But on that point, do you think that what happened to you
affected any of the decisions that you made regarding lockdowns and restrictions and things like that?
Yeah, because I think this has been a line of thought and inquiry by people. People have said, well, did my own personal experience of having a bad brush with COVID make me more risk averse, which is one way people have characterised the question. And I really think the answer to that is no. I was thinking all the time about the medical advice that we were given, and we tried wherever we could to get the balance right, but the priority was public health and saving life, and we were very clear about that from the beginning.
We still have Suzanne Evans and Lord Moyland with us. Suzanne, if we could just start where Boris left off, really. He was adamant that what happened to him didn't affect the decisions he made in terms of restrictions and lockdowns and things like that. I'm not entirely convinced, personally, because the lockdown seemed to go against every sort of instinct of Boris Johnson that I sort of thought I knew about him. What's your feeling about that?
I totally agree. I think the very fact that Boris was even basically off the scene for a couple of weeks because he was so ill meant that the kind of more risk-averse people, such as Matt Hancock, who clearly massively enjoyed his power trip, hosting those press conferences and bringing in ever more draconian restrictions, meant that those kind of people got the upper hand, in a sense, because I think at the beginning Boris was perhaps less in favour of lockdowns and restrictions, but ultimately he was overruled. But ultimately, I've got to blame Boris. The man did not have the courage of his convictions. I'm not sure I can really ever forgive him for what he did, locking us all up, and then the mask mandates, and then even worse, I know we didn't actually have vaccine mandates, but we came pretty close to that. It was despicable.
Daniel, you know Boris probably better than any of us on this panel.
Did bold Boris disappear?
Well, I don't think... everyone said right at the outset, if you introduce lockdowns, you're never going to get out of them. How are you going to get out of them? What's your exit strategy from day one? So the idea that we had a problem finding an exit strategy came as a shock to anybody. Why should that come as a shock to anybody? It was said right at the outset. And I don't think you have to look to Boris's brush, and it was a much more serious brush, I suspect, with COVID than he wants to give on there. But you don't have to look to that to explain anything. It's all explained from the beginning. Once you get into the lockdown, what's your strategy for getting out? How do you ever get out? China has just discovered, that the only way of getting out is revolt, basically. So the fact we got out of this at all, I think, is largely due to Boris. And I'd give him credit for that. We got out of it well over a year ago.
And this, in the government inquiry, needs to be some of the key points as well. Not only the decisions made, but like you said, how were you coming out of it? What planning did you do in advance?
Anyway, coming up, Boris...
And give us your views as well. What did you think of Boris? And you're right, he was reluctant to say how ill he was. He had been very ill. I'd heard all the stories, and I'd been speaking to people very close to him.
He was definitely downplaying how ill he was. Anyway, coming up, Boris Johnson was praised for his resolve in supporting Ukraine against Russian aggression, and after the break, we'll be revisiting that part of our interview with the former Prime Minister, where he explained why helping secure a Ukrainian victory matters so much to him. Don't go anywhere, we'll be back in a moment.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Welcome back to Saturday Morning with Esther and Philip. Views have been coming in thick and fast.
About an array of subjects. Sharon says here, I support the testing of travellers from China to the UK. We just need data, so let's get this from incoming travellers.
Roger says the rejection of Truss's Kwarteng mini-budget was a clear indication that the external globalists control Britain and do anything to stop the emergence of a successful independent Britain.
And Carol, back to China, says China is now in this mess because they locked down for so long. Regardless of cost, it just delayed the inevitable.
And Eric says public spending is higher now because the government support low-paid jobs with benefits. This is from a party that used to refuse subsidies to struggling industries and would let them fold. Now all the low-wage paying companies are being subsidised by benefits. Keep those views coming in.
Now, the world was stunned when Vladimir Putin sent Russian troops into Ukraine in February. The then Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, was praised for his bullish response to the crisis. We asked him what the UK can do to ensure a Ukrainian victory.
Most of the world will accept that the UK have been leading the way in helping Ukraine. President Zelensky said that himself. We were on a parliamentary delegation to the US last week where they acknowledged how we'd been leading the world in supporting Ukraine. I just wondered how you saw the conflict ending and what more we can do to help those Ukrainians who are seeking refuge in the UK, who are sort of being held up by the sort of form filling and bureaucracy. Yeah. If there was any more we could do to be able to get them out of Ukraine a bit quicker.
Yeah. So first of all, on helping the Ukrainians to come here, we've already given visas to tens of, I think, almost 30,000 people, and the number is climbing quite fast. And you know that's a good-sized town now, and it will continue to grow. British people have shown him amazing generosity, warm-heartedness. 200,000 homes, families open for Ukrainians to come here. What those women and children want is to be back in their own homes. And so to your first point, we've got to make sure that Putin fails in his catastrophic attempt to conquer, subdue, destroy another country, a neighbouring Slavic country. And the UK is not in the business of engaging itself or NATO in direct conflict with Russia. That would not be sensible. But what we can do is give them maximum economic, political and military support to Ukrainians to defend themselves. And what this war has revealed is that Putin was fundamentally wrong in that bizarre essay that he wrote. He was fundamentally wrong. He said that Ukraine wasn't really a proper country and that it should be part of Russia, essentially. That has proved to be the diametric opposite of the case. The Ukrainians love their country. They will fight to the end for their country. There is no way that Putin can now succeed. That is the brute, unarguable fact of the case. What we have to do now is make sure that we continue to give the Ukrainians the help and support that they need, continue to intensify the sanctions,
and did this war
and
show
continue
the strength
to
of
show
British intelligence?
to show more military support and other support. And on intelligence, I think that if you look back at the previous few weeks, it was clear that US and UK intelligence was pretty much on the money.
We still have Suzanne and Daniel with us. Daniel, some of my constituents can be quite cynical.
As can Philip, by the way.
Yeah,
and probably can the British public.
Absolutely. But and the reason I mention is that some of them have said to me that Boris was obviously had the Partygate thing hanging over him. It was making him. It was controversial. It was dominating the news agenda, and that he seized on this. He seized on this invasion by Putin so strongly because he saw it as a great distraction strategy away from all the stuff on Partygate. What would you say in response to that cynical view?
That's total rubbish. I went to a private meeting that he spoke at back in January, and he was asked questions on a number of topics, as a Prime Minister would. But when he was asked questions about Ukraine, the war hadn't started then. Remember, the war only started in the middle of February.
Yeah, about the 19th, wasn't it?
Yeah, this is in January. And he just, the way he answered, he just stepped up completely to world stage quality. He was completely on top of everything. I'm not saying, of course, there weren't other people in the cabinet like Ben Wallace who weren't also working extremely hard to help prepare what our response was going to be. And I think you have to remember that you go back, Boris goes back to being Foreign Secretary in the day when Putin cynically and with amusement, or with a joke on the television, sent two people or more, 2 or 3 people, over to Salisbury deliberately to murder somebody with a poisonous nerve agent that was so dangerous that coming into contact with it caused other deaths as well, completely innocent, just cynical acts of murder on foreign soil. And Boris was Foreign Secretary at the time. I think if he ever had any illusions about Vladimir Putin, they fell apart at that moment. And he led that response, and he was always going to lead the response to Ukraine as well, because the European countries mostly were compromised.
Right. And so war in Europe was a big moment, wasn't it, in 2022? It was, for most of us, a big shock.
It absolutely was. But I think an even bigger shock was the fact we had Russia, this major superpower, invading a country, and I think Putin expected to subdue Ukraine within days. And the fight back from the Ukrainian people has been absolutely incredible. And of course, there's been massive international support as well. But what a shame. I remember I worked very briefly in Russia in 1988, in the days of Gorbachev, when the Soviet Union was opening up and becoming much more democratic and much more internationalist. And now it's retreated back into its shell again under Putin. And as Daniel rightly mentioned, we've had the Salisbury poisonings. I mean, Putin is a dangerous, dangerous man. And what worries me is what he's going to do if he really feels he is losing that war. That absolutely terrifies me.
Suzanne, Daniel, thank you for now. Coming up, our look back at 2022 continues as we revisit our exclusive interview with former Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow, in which he opened up about his political journey from right to left.
But first, here's the latest news.
Esther and Philip, thank you. Good morning, it's 11:31. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom. Pope Benedict XVI has died at the age of 95. In a statement, the Vatican said he passed away just after 9:30 this morning within the Vatican City. In 2013, he became the first pontiff to step down from the role in 600 years due to old age and ill health. From Monday morning, people will be able to pay their respects as he rests in St. Peter's Basilica. Our reporter, Cameron Walker, takes a look at his life.
It's April 2005. White smoke rises from a chimney above the Vatican. A new pope, the 265th leader of the Catholic Church, has been elected. Pope Benedict XVI, aged 78, became the oldest newly elected pope since the 1700s, but also the first German head of the Catholic Church in centuries. Born Joseph Ratzinger in 1927, he lived with his Catholic family in Bavaria. Although his parents were anti-Nazi, Ratzinger was a member of the Hitler Youth. By the end of the Second World War, he was serving as a German soldier. Unwilling to fight, he deserted and was briefly held as a prisoner of war by the Americans. Ratzinger was ordained as a priest in 1951 and was awarded a doctorate in theology at the University of Munich a few years later. He taught at a number of universities before becoming the Archbishop of Munich and Riesling in 1977. He grew close to Pope John Paul II and became one of his closest advisors. Pope John Paul II died in April 2005. Joseph Ratzinger was elected head of the Catholic Church and became Pope Benedict XVI. He continues the legacy of his predecessor by speaking to other religious leaders, particularly Judaism and Islam. He aims to revitalise the Church in Europe and maintains traditional Catholic values relating to sexuality and priestly celibacy. He visited a number of countries in the early years of his papacy, including new guidelines allowing more use of the Latin Mass. He directly addressed historical sexual abuse within the Catholic Church, speaking out against it during a visit to the United Nations, but he came under media scrutiny in his alleged role in the cover-up of sexual and physical abuse cases by parish priests and in schools. The Vatican denounced the allegations as false and calumnious and said its handling of the cases showed wisdom and firmness. In 2013, Pope Benedict XVI announced his imminent resignation due to old age and ill health, making him the first pope in some 600 years to resign. More than 50,000 people crowded St. Peter's Square to watch his final public address. In this year's post-Christmas statement, Pope Francis made a surprise appeal at the end of his address to ask for prayers for former Pope Benedict, saying he was very sick. The Vatican issued a statement that he was receiving constant medical care. But soon after, the 95-year-old passed away in the Vatican, the home of the institution he'd dedicated more than 70 years of his life to. Cameron Walker, GB News.
Pope Benedict XVI, who's died at the age of 95. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. We'll have more news in half an hour, and Esther and Philip will be back in just a moment.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back. It's almost 20 to 12 on this New Year's Eve.
Lots of views coming in. Again, lots about the royal family when we did the interview with David Starkey. Jim says, I've just come back from a month in Texas visiting a friend on his ranch, and he was saying that Harry and Meghan, especially Meghan, are really unpopular there.
Yeah, and Gary says the King had no option other than to take action against Lady Susan Hussey. Otherwise, the pair across the pond would have screamed the racist card and probably would have made another Netflix documentary all about it.
And Marion says, Meghan and Harry are a right pair of spoilt brats with delusions of grandeur. How very dare they tell the world that British people are racist? We all know that she shows no respect towards her family, but the real disgrace is Harry selling his family out for a few pieces of silver.
Suzanne and Daniel are still with us, and in one of our favourite interviews, and probably one of our best interviews this year, we sat down with former Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow.
In this October sit-down, he reflected on his life in politics and expressed regret over being on the far-right fringes of the Conservative Party when he was younger. Describe you as a political animal. Did you always want to be an MP?
Pretty much always. At the age of 9, I stood at Frith Manor School in a school election on a manifesto of opposition to the appalling quality of school meals. I was bearded by the dinner ladies for my outspoken critique. I didn't advance an argument for compulsory competitive tendering, market testing or privatisation, but I did have a fairly populist, you'll be familiar with the concept, Philip, of populism, opposition to those school meals. So I was quite political at that point, as in argumentative. The local press said I had a strong platform manner. And then from 15 or 16, I became determinedly political. And there were two factors. It was the state of the country, streets unswept, sick people untreated, dead people unburied, and the sense that the unions were running the show. That was the negative that propelled my interest. And the positive was that I went to school in Margaret Thatcher's constituency. I went to hear her speak. I met her afterwards and was inspired. And so the rest is history. So that's a roundabout way of saying pretty much always. For a very short period of about 3 months in 1983, I flirted with the idea of becoming an academic. But really from 16 onwards, I always wanted one day to be a Member of Parliament. I never had any aspiration at that point to be a minister or an office holder, but did I want to represent a constituency and speak up for people and indeed hear the sound of my own voice? I did.
Now, you started out on the far right of the Conservative Party. There was reportedly Hang Nelson Mandela T-shirts and the repatriation committee of the Monday Club and Norman Tebbit closing down the Federation of Conservative Students because it was so right-wing, even for his taste. How much of that is true, and where did those beliefs come from?
I was a member of the Immigration, Repatriation and Race Relations Industry Subcommittee of the Monday Club, and as I've said on a number of occasions, that is the most shameful feature of my political record. I'm very embarrassed about that, I'm very apologetic for it, and I feel contrite. I didn't think of myself as a racist, but I was sidling up to people who certainly were racist, and I feel very guilty about that. I'm afraid I must take responsibility for it, but if you say, well, where did it come from? Was there someone else involved? The answer is that I did inhale from my late father. And although my late father was himself Jewish and was brought up in Dalston in Hackney in the 1930s and knew about the Cable Street riots and the threat of the black shirts and so on, he himself was very hostile to new Commonwealth and Pakistani immigration, and I think I was influenced by him, but I was wrong. I never wore a Hang Nelson Mandela T-shirt, but several members of the Federation of Conservative Students did. I was chairman at the time that the FCS was formally closed down, but the record will show that Norman Tebbit closed down the Federation in spite and not because of me, and he appointed me to run the successor body. So that's the full unvarnished truth. I have a checkered history, I made bad judgments and mistakes, but sometimes, either through malice or ignorance, people lump it all together and say, well, all of that was Berco's record. You have only to ask Norman, and Norman will tell you, I didn't close the Federation down because of John. At the time, I thought John was the sanest person in the street.
Now, when you got elected to Parliament in 1997, you were the darling of the right wing of the Conservative Party, and yet you ended up by supporting the Labour Party. Most people get more right wing as they get older. How come you've become more left wing as you've got older?
I accept it's odd. I don't know whether that thesis about people becoming more conservative as they get older, which I've always believed, is empirically supported, but certainly anecdotally, that's been my experience. A lot of people start on the left and move rightwards, and I have done the opposite. How so? A lot of Conservatives were influenced by the 1997 election, when we were virtually wiped out. Funnily enough, I wasn't. I remained rabidly right-wing for a number of years after that. Philip, Esther, the election that really influenced me, that, if you like, knocked me for six, was the 2001 election, because I had railed and inveighed against the Blair government. I didn't at the time have a high opinion of Tony Blair or of New Labour, and I represented a very conservative constituency, and I thought, well, presumably they will be reined back, the majority will be slashed, or better still, will get into office. In 2001, after 4 years of that government, we lost again, not by 178, but by 167, a majority of 167. And the Conservative seat tally went up from 165 to 166. That was the product of 4 years of the leadership of Mr. William Hague. And I thought, well, I didn't think much of that first 4 years of New Labour, but look where we are. We're hardly in any better position. So I thought to myself, what's at the root of this? And my judgment was that people disapproved of us on so many fronts. They thought we knew the price of everything and the value of nothing, that we hadn't atoned for our attitude to and weakening of the public services, and they thought, frankly, we were rather unpleasant. The so-called nasty party image seemed to me to contain more than a grain of truth. In fact, I think at one point I said we were widely regarded as racist, sexist, homophobic and anti-youth. That didn't make me think, well, I don't want to be a member of the Conservative Party, but it did make me think the Conservative Party is going to have to shift substantially, both as a matter of principle and as a matter of political pragmatism. Now, you may think I was wrong or you may think I was right, but that was why and how I came to shift from the hard right towards the political centre.
John Bercow there. Now, Suzanne, I don't know what you think about him, but he was absolutely an excellent Speaker of the House. Were you surprised with how reflective he was there?
Yeah, the first time I'd seen this interview, as you say, I thought he was a great speaker. I'd take my hat off to anybody who could remember the names and constituencies of all 650 MPs in the House of Commons. I mean, that is an incredible feat. You've got to have a big brain to be able to do that. Now, I thought he was a very good speaker until post the EU referendum, in which case he clearly was on the side of Remain, trying to bring every parliamentary device into play he could to try and stop this happening. So I did lose respect for him then. But as you can see, he's a very eloquent, very bright man who's clearly been on a very interesting political journey. What a shame his career had to end, really, with the ignominy of the bullying scandal.
Lots of people thought that at the time when we played it. Lots of people wrote in views, comments from our viewers saying exactly the same thing.
Daniel, how do you rate John Bercow's time as Speaker of the House of Commons?
Well, I have to say, despite profound political differences, he is an old friend, and I've known him a very long time. And I do think he's one of the most intelligent and amusing and interesting people who's been around in politics over the last few years. And it doesn't surprise me that that was such a very good interview, and all credit to him for being open about it. As Suzanne says, from my point of view and from the point of view of an awful lot of people, his opposition, his blatant opposition to Brexit, at a time when he was sitting in what was meant to be a neutral position in the House of Commons, I mean, not neutral in defending the rights of the House of Commons, we know that, but neutral as between the different policies being proposed, really destroyed his political credibility with a large part of the country. But I think he was... there are a lot of backbench MPs from his time who will say, quite rightly, that he did tilt the balance in favour of backbenchers and gave them more ability to hold the government to account. And they value that.
And this was his justification when we said, look, everybody could see you. Philip went and met with him to say you're not being impartial at all here as the Speaker over this Brexit debate. And he went, no, we're in uncharted territory. Yeah. Nobody's ever done it before, and therefore giving backbenchers more of a say. He justified it in his mind. Look, it's been amazing having you both here today, Suzanne, Daniel. I hope you'll come back and join us again. And most of all, I hope you have a wonderful New Year's Eve. Doing anything? Are you partying?
No, I'm afraid I'm a bit of a party pooper at my age.
You partying?
Having dinner with my friend Roz, who is the best cook in the world.
In or out? In or out?
In.
Right, well, I have to say that was a big story in the papers today. Most people aren't going out. They're staying in. That was a big story.
Watching GB News.
Well, next it's but what we always do at the end of the show, we do showbiz and we do sports. Though in just a second, that's Aidan McGee and Hayley Palmer.
But before we get stuck into the stories of the day in sports and showbiz, let's just remind ourselves of quite possibly, in a strong field, the worst joke of the year from our very own Aidan McGee.
For us today, Aidan.
Is that it? Is that all you've got?
No, listen. Good as always. Heard it before.
I did go to the 40 Towers experience about 3 years ago, and it was fantastic. They put like plastic dentures in my soup and things like that. They really wound me up, and I was wearing a jacket like this as well. So I mean, any food they spilt all over it, I'd end up not getting it out. But I did have an experience as well coming down from it was a little chef. It was called in Stamford on the A1, coming down from Newcastle, 2008.
No,
so no, they're not. They used to be called the Little Thief. They were so expensive. Anyway, I stopped, and I thought.
That was actually genuinely
funny. I genuinely laughed. Hang on, Aidan, can I tell you, you've let yourself down. You've let the station...
No, I actually thought, it said on there, worst joke of 2020. I thought that was actually genuinely quite funny for Aidan, to be perfectly honest. Jokes are usually the little thief.
What do you think was your worst joke? You've got minutes left to get, or a day left to get another bad joke
I don't think about the worst ones. I mean, you know, when the cost of living crisis was hitting its height in the summer, it cost me £5 to pump up my tyres. Remember that? It's a blooming inflation. You know?
Yeah, there you go. See, that's definitely.
There's another one. I think I couldn't even. Well, he needs to. Nobody else is laughing.
We're gonna repay you at the end of the show. Anyway, first of all, on sports, big news about Cristiano Ronaldo going to Saudi Arabia for some huge fee. The interesting thing was, I was watching the Liverpool-Leicester game last night, and they mentioned it on Sky Sports with Gary Neville, and I thought Gary Neville was going to go off on one about human rights in Saudi. Not a dicky bird.
Not a peep.
Not a dicky bird out of him.
There's a shock.
What do you make of it?
Well, look, he's made a rod for his own back in some ways, because he said he was leaving because he was looking for Champions League football. But the Champions League football seems to have taken second precedence to £400 million over 3 years. Now, the fact is, he's not really wanted around these clubs. You invite Cristiano Ronaldo into your club, you're inviting a circus into there. These are clubs that are working hard to try and steal a march on clubs above them, ahead of them in the Champions League. If you invite Cristiano Ronaldo into them, I think you're asking for trouble. And he also doesn't press the way that most of these teams want to play now. He hasn't got the legs to do it anymore. He's 37, so I think he's decided...
And no one can pay those wages.
Well, no, not at all. Exactly. And all these Emirate states all know that these sports people are viable. That's the issue. But then also there'll be no crowds in Al Nassr. So if you wanted atmosphere, you'd be better off joining NASA.
And they obviously want promotion and they want to go forward, don't they, the Saudi Arabia? It needs the publicity
they want the World Cup.
Money,
they want the World Cup in 2030.
Yeah, so it's to get the World Cup, yes, in 2030.
Hayley,
yes.
New Year's Eve, what's been the big showbiz stories of the year for you?
For me, I'm going to go in at number 5 quickly. Neighbours finishing, broke my heart. Just about got over it because Amazon Freeview are taking it on, so everything's okay. Just to console myself there. Number 4, Will Smith, that slap with Chris Rock. I mean,
gosh, was that only like this year?
Yeah,
it seems like ages ago.
Yeah,
was it February?
I think it was about February, Good knowledge there, good knowledge. And, I think it was a bit of a silly thing to do, but has it actually affected him? I don't think so, because his new film is out and it's got great ratings. So would he be back at the Oscars this year? I think he's been banned for 10 years, so no. But
they never said he couldn't zoom in from at home. So
he might still zoom about Will Smith this year. Number 3, I'm going to go in with Cher and her toy boy, because she's 73, he's 33, but she seems really in love. And on Christmas Day, I saw on Twitter, she's got the most beautiful diamond ring, and I'm happy for her.
As I always say, Esther likes having a toy boy.
We have to get that one in there, Phil.
Well, I'm hoping to get one for 2023.
Hey! Number 2, I've got to say Agatha Christie, because we talked about it for weeks and weeks. There's actually a play coming out in the West End in the spring, would you believe?
I've been watching the series.
Have you been watching the series as well?
Yeah, it's really good.
God, let's get a life. And number 1, I have to say Her Majesty the Queen passing in September, which was...
so you put that under showbiz?
Yeah. Well,
because you think she's...
The royal
we had to say that, didn't we? We had to
the royal family has become showbiz.
And equally, I guess she is the most famous person, not only in the country, but in the world, without a doubt.
The Queen of Showbiz.
Yes. Anyway, we've got a punishment for you, because last week people watched... My sister was on about the book she'd written about sprouts, and all the recipes you can have for sprouts, which she raised for children's hospice. She actually made some sprout cake.
I've got it here in the Tupperware. I'll give you a piece of cake afterwards.
You two are both going to be eating a piece of sprout cake.
Oh,
Be careful my sugar level, though, yeah?
One of my 5 a day.
Well, look, I can't believe it. We've whizzed through that. We've had your top 5 moments. I would have wanted to have talked...
Worst joke.
Worst joke.
Oh, come on, give me one more joke.
That was... No. I don't think we've got time.
We definitely have
next week.
Whatever. But anyway, we and the GB News family would like to wish you a very, very happy New Year.
And thank you for watching. We'll see you next year.
Hello, a very good morning to you. I'm Aidan McGiven from the Met Office. There will be plenty of spells of rain across the country this New Year's Eve, but some drier weather expected as the clock strikes midnight later. And some significant temperature contrasts up and down the UK. Quite cold first thing across northern Scotland, much milder further south with strong southwesterly winds. And those winds are now bringing us some wet weather into southern England, parts of Wales. The rain moving north during the morning. It'll be on and off, but there'll be some heavier rain at times, especially for South Wales and southern parts of England. Rain warning in force because that could cause some issues on the roads. Further north, northern England, Northern Ireland, seeing some showers, but north of the central belt, actually plenty of dry and bright weather, although an icy start here, and it stays cold into the afternoon, 3 degrees or so, with some wintry showers around the coast. Much milder further south, 13 Celsius, 14 even for southern parts of England, but here a wet start to the evening as rain moves north. Then it turns drier in the south whilst the rain pushes into northern England, southern Scotland, Northern Ireland with some flakes of snow over the hills. It doesn't quite reach the central belt, I think, for the midnight hour, so could get away with a drier Hogmanay celebration, but it does eventually reach central Scotland by the end of the night, and then it mixes with cold air, so we'll see some significant snow over the Highlands and Grampians on the first day of 2023. Rain extending into Northern Ireland, showers for northern and western England, parts of Wales as well. Strong winds expected on Sunday. Gales around southwestern shores first thing, but some brighter weather about as well in the southern half of the UK as well as the Northern Isles, with some sunshine at times, but plenty of showers about, so expect some rain at times. Monday looks like a drier day for many of us. Still some showers about. Tuesday starts dry, but there'll be some rain arriving later. And then the second half of next week looks a bit milder for all of us.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere. Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Hello and welcome and a happy Christmas. It is still the 7th day of Christmas. I am the Reverend Calvin Robinson and I'll be standing in for Alistair Stewart today, who's having a well-deserved break. For the next 2 hours, I'll be keeping you company on TV and on radio with the stories that really matter all over the country. Plenty to come, from this year's honours list to pressure on the NHS. I'll keep you up to date, but first, here are the news headlines.
Good afternoon, it's just gone 12 o'clock. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. Pope Benedict XVI has died at the age of 95.